Hello, good morning, everybody. I'm Nicole Galacci, and we are back with another mentorship session today. Today's focus is on what you can do with your PhD or postgraduate degree in the food and beverage processing sector. I'm joined today by Esther Unguta and Veronica Hislop. Veronica, you may know well as part of our team. And Esther is joining us as somebody that currently works in the industry. I think the first thing I'll do is have Veronica kind of explain her role with our organization, with CareersNow and with FoodGrads. And then she is currently doing her PhD, so she can share a little bit about that. And then we'll go over to Esther and have you introduce yourself and what you've done, what you're doing now, and then we're going to pepper you with lots of questions. So if that's okay, Veronica, you go ahead first.
Absolutely. Hello, everyone. It's so nice to see you. My name is Veronica, as Nicole just alluded to, and I'm with the CareersNow team helping to create amazing content for this great initiative. One of the things that I primarily do is the FoodGrads podcast, which is almost an extension of what we're doing today, but I also explore other careers in the industry by interviewing individuals throughout. So if you ever want to check that out as well, we can link that a little later, but I'm excited to be on this conversation.
Do you want to tell us a little bit about your PhD first, what you're doing, and then I think that will make sense to when we talk to Esther.
Yes, my hat was not on there. Too many things juggling. So I wanted to join this conversation today because I am actually a PhD as well. I am going to Toronto Metropolitan University and I am studying fat crystallization. So this conversation is very, very important to me because I'd love to get those insights and I think it'll be good.
Awesome. So Esther, welcome. Thank you again for joining us today. We really appreciate you taking your time out. I know it's year end. Everyone's super busy. So, I really appreciate your time. And without people like yourself that are willing to do these sessions, it would be impossible to sort of help people understand the different career options that are available and what is out there. So thank you. If you wouldn't mind, please feel free to introduce yourself and then we'll kind of talk about your career story.
Yeah. So thanks for having me. So I would consider myself a food and fermentation scientist with a lot of experience in sensory science. So I did my undergrad at the University of Guelph in food science, and I did a minor in functional foods and nutraceuticals. And kind of from my time in undergrad was where we took a bunch of different courses related to product development, food microbiology, food chemistry, and then in the upper year courses such as taking cereal science, meat science, dairy science, I really became interested in industrial microbiology, in particular dealing with fermentation, specifically beer and wine science. And so after my undergrad, I moved to Brock University in St. Catharines and did a postgrad certificate in grape and wine technology. And I did this as it's a 1-year program, and essentially it's to learn about the wine industry. The lights in this room have gone. There we go. And essentially, it gave me the tools to, if people wanted to work in industry afterwards. But I wanted to continue on, and so then I pursued a master's in biotechnology, specializing in enology at Brock, where I looked at optimizing sparkling wine quality through various winemaking practices, and specifically looking at the foaming properties in sparkling wine. From there, I wanted to move out of Canada and kind of experience life abroad. And so I moved to New Zealand to pursue a PhD at Massey University in New Zealand, and focused a bit more on the sensory and consumer science side of things, and not related in wine. And then that happened kind of over the initial pandemic, which created some challenges with collecting data. But I eventually decided to move back to Canada and work in the distilled spirits industry. And so using the skills that I built from all my wine knowledge as well as my sensory knowledge, to a job in Montreal, working as a research scientist at Lallemont Biofuels and Distilled Spirits. And I was able to kind of transfer all of that knowledge from wine into the distilled spirits industry, but also learn a lot as well. And then about 6 months ago, I moved to Windsor, Ontario to work as a product development specialist. So I work as a specialist under the Absolute Group, which is a branch of the Pernod Ricard company.
That's amazing. Interesting pathway. So, did you always have a plan? Like, was that something that, or did you zig and zag and?
I did and didn't. I knew I wanted to do I wanted to go to grad school kind of after my undergrad, but because I didn't have a big wine background, I wanted to do the 1-year postgrad certificate, which gave me the knowledge I needed to then work and do my master's. I think that really was advantageous. But at Brock, we actually had access to career services and a career counselor, and I kind of utilized that during that postgrad and master's time to figure out whether I wanted to pursue more education. And so I did have a plan, but it also came back to thinking about what kind of job I wanted down the line and whether I needed the education for it. I never was, the plan was not as specific as I need to go to this university and this school and study this and work with this professor. It was more so, um, how do I eventually get about doing this to get the job that I want down the line?
Mm-hmm. And your current role, if you wouldn't mind, could you talk us through one of the questions that we get? One of the some of the feedback that we get. Young people, they see job titles, but they don't know what that means. Like literally, what do you do when you arrive at the office in the morning, or do you
Right.
work in the office? Are you off-site sometimes? Like, could you describe that?
I think that is probably something I also kind of struggle to understand, but it also varies across organizations. So in my role, I am on site, and I essentially deal with the product development and building of new innovations of specific products related to our brand. And that will essentially come down from marketing, maybe getting a brief, and then dealing with what product and innovations that they're looking to build over time. So my skills as a scientist are then used in the lab to build and innovate these products, and then dealing with the testing of them and going kind of back and forth across teams to come up with a product that eventually is suitable to launch. And yeah, so it is a lot of a lab component, but there's also a lot of desk work as well in dealing with communications, but also handling data and kind of being able to communicate the results and report writing.
So you work with different departments to be able to do your role. You do interact with other departments as well.
In this role, mainly I work within our group, but we have access to kind of understanding what's going on at other levels in the organization. And we do have, I guess this is quite similar across my experience with different companies, stage gate meetings where kind of updates will be brought up about where projects are. And so, for example, like in my previous role, I did have a lot more interactions with, for example, salespeople or marketing people or technical people. It just varies depending on, I guess, the role and as well the size of the organization.
Do you feel like your role is important for the success of the business?
Absolutely. I think obviously I'm very lucky to work with well-known consumer brands, but as well dealing with trends in the market. Things change and consumers change their purchases, and so my role really is, I do feel like dealing with the innovations and building products to then see on the market is important for business development, but as well as for understanding consumers.
I guess I have a lot of questions, and we are going to pass things over to Veronica. And my questions are more broad, but what attracted you to this industry? I mean, I see those bottles behind you, and if it's Christmas time and holidays, busy time for you. It's a fun industry. I would say the sector you're in is deemed more interesting by some, I guess. So yeah, what attracted you? What was the main attraction to the industry?
I think for me, just in general, as a food scientist, kind of why I went into food science to begin with was I really liked, well, I liked food. I liked the aspect of, my contribution to society. If we think, bigger picture, is seeing products that I work on and help develop out on market. And, people wouldn't, I'm not, famous, no one will recognize me, but it's nice to know that like my small contribution to society or something that I've helped out with is there on the shelves. And I think in terms of getting into the beverage side of the food industry and specifically with wine and spirits, I really liked fermentation and understanding how yeast can kind of really give us these really cool products. And so it was more so just the science side and the fermentation aspect of things. And then that really grew into then learning more about distilled spirits and those products as well. So it was really came from a science, I guess, liking, and then it kind of grew into, well, what can I do with my knowledge as a fermentation scientist?
Do you think your skill set's transferable? Like, there comes a day that you perhaps want something a little different, to pursue something a bit different. What you've learned, could you use it anywhere in the food industry or food and beverage industry?
I think so. I also started off a bit working in a dairy science lab. So I think even the skills from there were quite applicable because I was working with cheese. So even learning like the micro aspects of that and the chemical analysis, that became relevant for what I did in my master's. And although it was not in cheese and it was with wine, that was relevant. And then like a lot of my PhD research was also not related to wine, so learning how to apply those skills over time, and then I've been able to use those skills into the jobs that I'm doing now. So I would say a lot of lab skills that I did are definitely transferable to the role I'm doing now and my previous role. And as well as, say, for example, dealing with experiments and being able to present that data is definitely transferable, because that is also required in what I do on a daily basis as well, being able to communicate and look at trends in the data. So I do think there's definitely a lot of transferable skills. There's also a lot of skills that you end up learning on the job, and that is not taught, but that comes with time. And I do think, yes, I probably experienced a steep learning curve, which is quite typical when you do start a new job. But then having that mindset switch from industry into academia was definitely there. But there's a reminder of, like, you do have the skills, you just have to figure out how to apply them to what you're now doing.
Now, I am an HR person. I'm a recruiter. I do this, the CareersNow stuff, the FoodGrads stuff. I am intrigued to hear the two of you have a conversation now as scientists. This is not my forte at all, so I'm interested to learn and hear what you'll discuss. I know Veronica has a bunch of questions, so I'm going to hand things over to her now, and I may have one or two questions at the end, but happy to let the two of you really sort of do a deep dive into what Veronica would like to know, and I think other PhD students would, as well as folks that are perhaps thinking about doing their PhD. So over to you, Veronica.
Yes, there's so many different. I don't know where I want to take the conversation, because you've actually already addressed a lot of the questions that I've had. But I guess I'll take it a step back and think about the education wise. When deciding your PhD, where you were going to do it, did you base it off of the supervisor, or did you base it off of the area that you wanted to go to?
It was a bit of both. I knew I wanted to not do it in Canada, so that was the first thing of figuring out where I would do it. Um, it helped to realize I know I wasn't going to do it at home, so that was the first step. And then it was a matter of finding, I knew what skills as well that I wanted to develop to do it. So it was a matter of finding a project that would give me those skills, and then finding someone who um, had would be able to help me develop those skills, if that makes sense.
It does.
Um,
Is
yeah.
the skills that you're referring to the more hands-on skills that you've been mentioning, or what were those?
Well, I wanted to focus a lot on, like, sensory and consumer science and really understanding more people. So a lot of my work in my master's was bioanalytical and chemical and lab based, and it was in terms of PhD as well, but it was also dealing with setting up consumer studies, dealing with experiments like one-on-one with participants. So kind of tying that in, because I knew that I would eventually work in industry. And so having that knowledge of dealing, like, kind of consumers and understanding how that aspect ties into product development and food is important for me.
I love that. There's a lot of foresight there, so that's really good, because I know that some people choose to stick with the PhD because they don't know what they want to do in industry, but they know they like school, so they want to keep bridging those like skills that they have there. And then as well, for many, the transition between PhD and industry can be a bit jarring, from what I've heard. Would you be able to elaborate on what the differences are in terms of like a workplace setting between a PhD and industry?
I think a lot of grad school, um, and this is even from the master's level, is very much individual, like, you're driving your work as a student. And although you do have support and, I guess, other grad students that are in a lab with you, it's very much your work, which is a lot. It's
Yeah.
quite difficult. But in industry, my experiences have been, you're more working with a team, and although you have a set a certain skill set. You've got coworkers who also have different skill sets, but also different teams who have the answers for you. So in the case of being a student, where you might be the one required to find the answers, you might get a bit of guidance, but like it's your job to solve and troubleshoot. Although I do that in industry, I have a lot more support of like, say for example, someone who has a certain skill set in something, going to them and asking them questions, because um, I can do that and know that they'll have an answer instead of spending time researching to kind of find the answer myself. I've got access to kind of working more as a team. So I would say that is like one of the big ones as well. And I think just the outcomes are also different. It's not a lot of it is science driven, and there are goals to achieve scientifically, but also it's a business and consumers are really the goal. So I think the outcomes are quite different between the two.
That makes sense. I really like the team aspect. I think that's a really nice thing because I know with PhD, be very lonely for a lot of
Yep.
individuals, even though you have your support of your supervisor, you have your lab mates, but yes, you have to go find a lot of the stuff on your own, even though you can ask and you have to reteach yourself that, and having that wealth of knowledge within your team now, that sounds like it's a really good thing.
Yep.
Yeah. Nicole, did you have any questions to add on to that conversation, or should I keep trucking along?
You keep going. If you have more, you keep going. Yep.
Okay. So another thing that we also in the PhD is that you have your project. It's a one project and it has chapters 1, 2, 3, 4. As you come into the workplace setting, are you working on multiple projects at one time, or is it more focused on one thing?
So I'm relatively new into my current role. I've kind of been in it for 6 months now, but in my previous job, I had my own projects, and typically we were dealing with kind of 3 or 4 throughout the year. So they were ongoing projects. Um, and that's the same in my current situation. I've got a couple projects on the go. So they'll all have various timelines. And uh, some over time will be more of a priority than others. So it's a matter of managing, what may need to be rushed and more of a focus at that time versus something that can be a slow progress based off of the timeline. So it really is kind of multiple things that you kind of learn to juggle. But I think having the skill set that I have has allowed me to be able to handle them. Like I don't feel like there's more pressure because I'm focusing on a lot more things.
Amazing. And I guess it sounds like you're juggling, although you're managing, you're juggling. Do you use any special tools in order to do that? I know that's a very specific question.
Not really. I think having the deadlines, and typically, obviously in industry, the deadlines are, uh, I guess, faster um, than in academia. Having the deadlines and having kind of like the goals that you want to achieve by those deadlines really helps. So
Mhm.
um, I would say that is what forces you to be organized.
That makes
Um,
sense.
yeah, that's kind of really, I don't really, there are certain tools that we use to track the progress of a project, um, but it is more so, you know,
Yeah.
kind of managing your time to be able to get those things done by the goal date.
Okay, that makes sense. I mean, that is one thing with your PhD. I know from personal experience that it's your project. Kind of, if you do not do well, it's on you, the onus. It's really your name on it. But when you come into the workplace, there's this. If you don't meet a deadline, then multiple people are affected by it. It's like production's affected by it, marketing's affected by it. So it really I can see why things move a lot faster. And then another thing that I wanted to talk about is, so now that you're in your current role, it seemed throughout your journey that many things have been, building up that skill set. So you wanted to build up the sensory, you wanted to build up, the lab skills. So currently in your role, is there any skills that you're working on that you're looking to improve that can help your work?
I think, I would say I'm quite confident in my skill set as a scientist, but now I'm also thinking about, um, down the line, what that looks like. So a few things that I'm hoping to eventually learn is also learning just like the business and how it works. Um, because I would say I was quite focused on my science and understanding, fermentation, for example, and distillation and product development and innovation, but then understanding how that impacts business, and as well as like consumer insights. And I think I have, a basis and like a base understanding, but
Mhm.
kind of developing those skills as well.
That makes sense. That sounds like a lot of fun, though, building up those skills, the business side, because it can really put a new perspective onto things and how that involves the consumers. And has there been anything that has been particularly interesting about the business that you've been learning?
There's a lot. There's a lot. There's a lot. Honestly, it seems intimidating. So I'm like kind of slowly over time will chip away at it, but there's a lot involved that I just wasn't aware of. So
Right.
yeah, I think just taking it slowly is kind of how I'm approaching it. I think really having that kind of sensory consumer side that helps with like slowly understanding marketing and how that works. But I have like no understanding really of sales or any of those things. So so it's a lot of like eventually getting to that.
That makes sense. For those who are listening, they might not be aware of, like, we keep saying sensory, and I know what you're talking about with this, but what are you actually referring to, like, when you mean sensory, and what type of things surround figuring out what is good sensory for a consumer?
So sensory and consumer science is, I guess you can say, a discipline of that is required in the food and beverage space, but it's understanding how our senses and how we perceive um, things. So, for example, uh, if we go to a grocery store, a lot of times when we shop for food, one of the first senses we'll use is our sight to determine if that food looks like something I would want to eat, like enjoy eating.
Mhm.
So, for example, if you're trying to pick out a bunch of apples for the week, you look at them and you assess based off of its appearance, the color, um, also the texture, the size, all of those things before you even purchase it. So, kind of understanding the science behind that is what sensory and
Oh.
consumer science is. So, for example, like with sparkling wine, when you open up a bottle and pour the wine into a glass, sensorially, you're perceiving the bubbles and the foaming properties way before you even smell and taste a sample. So, as a consumer, if you were to open that wine and see that it was flat upon pouring, you'd know that there was something wrong with the product, and that you weren't getting sparkling wine that you purchased. So, you would already know that the quality was bad, and so that's even before you even taste and smell a product. Then you eventually look at taste and smell, and there's a lot of aspects that lead to us determining as a consumer whether we accept or reject a product, but also like sensorially perceive the properties in a food or beverage.
Oh, huh, that's really interesting. I think that being in the, like, the wines, the distills and all that, it sounds though you have a little bit of more of a challenge, because with an apple, you can hold it in your hand, you can kind of feel to see if it's good, but a lot of yours work would kind of be reliant on the bottle? Like, is that how I'm understanding it?
Yeah, so there's a lot of science that goes into, I guess, consumers' perception of even, what a bottle looks like, the design, the label. There's a lot of understanding, and this goes also into psychology. And there are a lot of people that do study this in terms of like how consumers purchase their products based off of what the label looks like. Even like where it's placed in the shelves in the store. And so kind of understanding that is key to getting a consumer to purchasing a product. And that's kind of really important in this space because again, yeah, you wouldn't know until you pour and taste.
That's so cool. I can see why learning so many different parts of the business and really getting a hone on all parts can really help you with your job as well.
Yeah.
Wow.
I was going to just cut in. We were at an event a few weeks ago, and there was a lot of psychology students, and they were saying, "What can we do in the food industry? Like, is there a place for us?" And so the fact that you mentioned that, I think that there is. We always say it. There's a place for everybody, regardless of your entry point, where you sort of sit, and what you're interested in. There's a place for you, and so you've beautifully explained that. I think with what you do. Do you have more questions, Veronica? You go ahead. I just wanted to butt in there.
No, I'm just thinking about going back to the career perspective, and maybe there was some questions that maybe we haven't addressed with our conversation, Nicole. Is there anything that I have missed off the top of my head that maybe that our audience would particularly want to know from that career perspective? So,
Yeah. For me, I was going to I was going to say. I think the question that I would have next is, in your world, Esther, when you look at the people that you work with, what are other PhD? Are you aware that other people in the company that have a PhD, and what do they do?
Yep. So we have analytical chemists, our head distiller as well, has a PhD. So there's a lot of people that have postgraduate education. A lot of people on the team that I work with have their master's degree as well. So they've spent a lot of time focusing on research and developing those postgraduate skills. Yeah, there's a lot of, I think even the higher people higher up as well have postgraduate education. So there's definitely a lot that you can transfer into industry. I would say there's probably like a period of even, what a lot of students face after their bachelor's in terms of kind of determining where they kind of want to grow and what kind of role they want to be in. I think that's the same thing people with postgraduate education experience as well. So it kind of takes a while to figure out, okay, this is kind of what I want to be doing and then grow from that. But I do think that there are a lot of people here that have spent that time to get postgraduate education and are doing very well in industry.
Yeah, I mean, I think you need to see it, right? People like to see themselves and see what other people are doing. You don't know what you don't know, so it's good to have that range. What's your take? Maybe both of you have a response to this, but what's your take on education versus experience? As a recruiter, I think that's a big question. People are always concerned, what if I continue on in education? Will I be desirable at the end to get hired? Will my education outweigh my work experience? And then will I be hireable? What are your thoughts there?
I think there's definitely, I mean, it is an interesting question because I obviously was concerned about that. I think a lot of my other friends that I went to school with were concerned about that as well. There are a lot of roles that will hire requiring postgraduate education. So that is already listed on the job ad. And so those are really the positions that people should be applying for, I would say. So for example, like the first role the previous role that I had, they were asking for postgraduate education. And so companies are aware of what that education gets you. I think you do also develop those skills over time. You're not going to be able to read a job, job ads. You'll see that you might not have all the skills that are listed, but it's definitely still something that you can learn. And recruiters know that as well, that you're not going to hit all the skill sets that is asked as well. But I think there's definitely space for people who feel like if they've spent too much time in academia, whether or not that they'd be able to find success in industry. But there's definitely space there because a lot of companies recognize the skill sets that you develop in academia, for example, troubleshooting, and being able to kind of solve problems is probably one of the biggest things that you learn in postgraduate education, as well as being able to like look at data, predict results, but also kind of deliver and figure out how to get them. Those are really important when working in industry. So I think there are companies that are aware of the experience that you can get from postgraduate education, and I think that that's probably where you need to be focusing on if trying to work in industry.
I think it's about advocating for yourself, isn't it? Like, you hit the nail on the head. There's a lot of soft skills that you're developing, and you need to make sure that you're listing those on your resume and make sure the hiring manager, who might not know, I mean, you take for granted that recruiters and hiring managers fully understand what a PhD graduate will bring to the table. So it's almost on you to put your best foot forward and make sure you're listening to sessions like this where you can really take the advice from people that are doing it and someone that's successfully in the industry. And that was really one of my main questions was, have you personally experienced any roadblocks? But it sounds like you've managed that balance of work experience and academia to be able to successfully move through your career. Any regrets? Anything that you say, if I was to do it over again, I would do something differently?
I don't know. I think that's a hard question.
We can come back to it if you think of something, because sometimes it might be, well, I wish I'd maybe done a different program, or this would help me now. So I always like to throw that out and see if there's anything that you wish you'd have done. But it sounds like if nothing comes to mind immediately, it sounds like not.
I would say that in general in life, I would say it's not so much regrets, it's lessons. So there's definitely lessons I've learned. And I'd rather have learned them when I was younger than older. And I feel like I've learned a lot of lessons, but I wouldn't say they're regrets. There's definitely a lot of things that I would have done differently, but I also sometimes you just don't have the capacity to do things differently. You don't have the skills or the knowledge, but I feel like I did have access to the resources that I needed to make the decisions I needed to make. But I think you kind of learn as you go. So I wouldn't say any like hard regrets, but more so like lessons that I can kind of take, like, oh, I should have been better at this or done this instead, or like learn this thing.
And Veronica, please feel free to jump in if you have questions.
I actually do have a question. So this is piggybacking off of the last one about balancing work and education. So I was just curious, during your PhD, did you do any like networking events, or did you maybe have a job that was related to the industry that you were going, or did you just fully commit to your research?
I think, okay, so in my master's degree, I did I also worked as a teaching assistant and like lab demonstrator. So that kind of gave me also an additional set of skills of like being able to kind of mark grade, but also teach and kind of also build my communication skills with students, and kind of work as like a mentor, so to speak, to the students as they were completing their undergrads. That was not required in New Zealand. And so I didn't really do that, but I did have opportunities to kind of help with supervising like honors students as they were kind of completing their degree. Um, it was mostly research based, so not as much work experience. I also did work for a bit at a winery during my master's, but at some point, I had to just commit to working on my master's. So it wasn't long, but it would be on weekends. And mostly it was just focusing kind of on school.
And did you also do any networking during that time, maybe going to like wine industry events or
Yep.
anything related?
Yeah. So with my research, attended conferences. COVID kind of impacted attending them in person, so a lot were virtual. And so I was able to network that way. And in my master's, for example, a lot of my research was directly related to industry because we worked with wineries and local vineyards. And so I was able to kind of talk to the winemakers that we were working with and kind of get information and share our information as well. And so I did have a direct kind of link to industry and know that the research that I was doing was beneficial and kind of valuable information and important for them, which was really nice because you do get to see kind of how that relates to industry before even entering. And I would say like the conferences also helped just to see, what other scientists were focusing on, but that also developed kind of the skills in terms of presentations and communication. And really, I use that now when in meetings and if I'm required to present or write a report on the progress of a project. So yeah, I think I was quite lucky to have access to direct access to industry during that time.
That's amazing. And then just like quick question, were the conferences because for me, there's different, if you're in Ontario, for example, there's the Canadian Institute of Food Science and Technology, so the CIFST conference, where it's kind of a hybrid of industry as well as science. Well, I have other conferences like the American Oil Chemical Society, which is a very specific lipid conference that I go to that is very science. Did you find that the conferences you went to were more of a hybrid, or were they very scientific research updates?
It's a mix. So
Okay.
some of the smaller conferences would have been yes, a bunch of scientists from various universities and students that are presenting, but as well as certain companies sending their employees to attend and having industry there as well, just to see what was going on on the academic side. But then that also gave the opportunity for the academics to see what was going on in industry. I would say like that was quite typical of the smaller conferences that I attended. The larger international ones were very science focused, very academic. And I think usually, depending on if you're in industry and the company that you work for, a lot of times you may have the opportunity to attend some of those scientific conferences. And that gives you kind of an understanding and an update on what's going on that side of things as well. But it was a mix. And I think having some of those access to both of them, if possible, is ideal to just be able to see what's going on the other side.
Well, being on the other side, now that you work in industry, how would you suggest if someone was like at a networking event, how would someone approach you? Like, what would be a good way for someone to approach you if they're doing their PhD, not to get a job, but just to more have a conversation? Maybe Nicole should answer. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't. I don't.
I know. The reason I asked this question, so where my head is at, is that it can be really intimidating for someone to go to a networking event.
Yeah.
And they do their research. So it's just, what's a good way to break the ice, essentially?
I think that's. I mean, as a student talking to people, it was, hopefully, if there's a poster session that allows you to walk around and talk to people presenting their posters. If someone's given a talk, I remember usually keynote speakers are very busy. Sometimes they're in and out, or they're there just for the day of the conference. But if you are really interested in what they're doing, kind of pulling them aside in the coffee breaks and saying like, hey, I really enjoyed your talk. This was really interesting. This is what I do, kind of breaking the ice that way. That really is beneficial. I don't think people are intimidating, so it's not difficult to do, but I wouldn't know. It's quite difficult to say, how would I want someone to approach me? You could approach me, it would be fine.
I think I agree. I think most people are good human beings and want to help. And I think it is about not coming forward to sort of drain that person. I need, but more, I really enjoyed the article you wrote, or I enjoyed that video. I think that's a great icebreaker. People like to hear about work they've done or something that they've brought forward. So and it shows that you actually do know the person as well, and it's not just a case of, oh, I'm just running around this room trying to meet as many people as I possibly can. So I think that sort of you got to be genuine and have a little bit of a plan. If there's, before you go to the event, we always say, see who's going, and then decide who you really need to meet with. You don't need to meet everybody in the room, but who would be most beneficial to have a conversation with and learn a little bit about them. So yeah, you're not just sort of firing up to them, grabbing business cards and can I add you to my LinkedIn kind of thing. And so that would be sort of how I would piggyback off of that answer.
And I would say I will just add that usually ahead of time, like conferences will either have their delegates listed. And a lot of conferences use apps now, so you can see kind of who's attending, or even looking at the program and seeing when certain talks are, and if you're interested in a certain person's talk, just making sure that you actually make it to that talk to be able to talk to them afterwards. But yeah, even using the apps and connecting that way and kind of trying to find time. I think most people are quite approachable and happy to talk about. If you approach them as well, saying, with interest, they're happy to talk about what they, presented at a conference or what they do.
Mm-hmm. So sort of taking a step back, and you mentioned that even the world of networking and conferences, the technology and innovation has changed the way that we meet now, because there are those apps and different tools that are in use now. How do you think technology and innovation has changed your role, what you do in the industry since you started, or has it changed?
I don't know how much it's changed in the past. Well, I mean, it has changed, but in terms of even just like access to data or types of data is definitely kind of the biggest thing that I've seen. But in terms of even communicating information across teams, I feel like that's quite streamlined and very efficient, especially over the past few years, and kind of getting that information real time. I think technology has definitely impacted kind of how, for example, like sensory and consumer science, how we can collect the data quite quickly, but across, like different areas or spaces. That's kind of probably the biggest thing. But in terms of product development, it's been, I think, relatively consistent.
Yeah, and the reason I asked, we're out at a lot of events and talking to students, and part of our job is to attract people to the industry and sort of point out the pluses. I mean, we all eat, we all drink. They should have a vested interest in who's making their food, where their food comes from, all that stuff. So, and food and beverage processing has not, historically been a place that people think of when they think of their careers. And that's largely due to the conversations going on at the school level. It's not part of the conversation. So part of what we do is to have these types of conversations to sort of showcase. And we kind of, we definitely emphasize the fact that we're always going to want to eat and drink. So this industry is not going anywhere. So it is a great place to carve out a career. And like you've pointed out today, so that, you can continue on in your education and there's still a home for you at the end, and bring that wonderful experience and skill set to the industry. So we are closing in on the 11 o'clock hour. I guess my last question to you, top 3 pieces of advice, or 2, whatever, and that, Veronica, can go to you as well. Top pieces of advice you would give to, I guess in this situation, somebody that is considering their PhD, and also if we can combine, working in the food industry there, that would be great. But what would your top pieces of advice be to a student?
I think if you have access to career resources, that you should use them. I found that I was really lucky that where I did my master's had access to career counselors, and sitting with them and determining, whether or not you even needed to do the education based off of the kind of job you want. That I think having that second opinion is really important. They even, they help everything with everything from, like cover letters and resumes, but really trying to figure out, if you actually need to be doing that, and then if yes, what that looks like. So definitely my first piece of advice would be getting access to career resources. Networking would be the other one. I have friends that after their bachelor's degree went on into industry and worked, and they were actually the people that I contacted when I started to look for jobs, because they had been in industry longer than I had. So if there was a job that I saw that was, maybe looking for a research scientist, and requiring, X amount of education or whatever, and they happened to work at that company or previously had worked at the company, I talked to them. Even if it had been a few years since I spoke to them, I had always had good relationships with, my fellow students. So it was not awkward to say, hey, how's it going? I know you used to work at this place. I'm thinking about applying for a job there. Do you have any advice? Or if they knew someone that still worked there, or if they still worked at that company, what was the situation, and if they knew anything a bit more about that role, because oftentimes you can also get referred by someone, and the people are quite happy to refer you if they know you. So networking is really important, and kind of keeping those connections and not being afraid to go back, because I think most people are quite helpful and want you to succeed. So and also having that insider knowledge of like what a day-to-day may look like is really beneficial before kind of committing really to anything. And I guess my third piece of advice would be it's very difficult. It's very difficult because it's very hard, because I have to tell myself this, but being aware that you will have a learning curve with the transition. And it's very difficult when you're a graduate student to not be too like, a lot of people are quite hard on themselves, and if things or success doesn't seem to be as quick as you're used to, it's quite difficult to kind of handle that transition. And so kind of taking things slowly and being aware that I do have the skill set and the space and the knowledge to be in this new space, but accepting that there are a lot, maybe timelines are a lot faster, outcomes, have certain implications that might not have been the case previously. And so just accepting that it takes time to understand that, and it takes time to transfer those skills into a new role and into a new environment. So really it's just a matter of like being easy on yourself, because you're aware and capable of doing it. It's just a matter of time, really.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Veronica, do you have a bonus piece of advice?
I think I'm going to leave it at that. I think that's a really good place. Those are really good pieces of advice.
Yeah, I would say the one bonus I would say is don't burn bridges. Having been in the industry for a long time, it is a huge industry. It's also really small. Everybody knows everybody. And, I speak to more senior people in their career, and, reference checking and that kind of thing is still very, very much needed and can be the make or break for you getting that next role. So, don't burn bridges. Like, be a good human and make smart decisions in terms of who you're working with and how you leave companies and that kind of thing, because that can haunt you if you create a bad reputation for yourself. So on that note, thank you so much for bringing your awesomeness to this conversation. I really appreciate it. Both of you with your knowledge on the science side, and I think it was a really cool dynamic listening to the conversation. Again, we couldn't do these types of sessions without people like you, Esther, coming on and sharing your experience and your thoughts. So we are eternally grateful. To job seekers out there listening to the session, please visit www.CareersNow.ca to create your job seeker profile or your student profile. There's a ton of information there to support your career search. Please check out our FoodGrads podcast with Veronica, who's our host. She does a deep dive into all different career paths with different professionals. And you can really learn, much like what we've done today, the ins and outs of somebody's role. There's also skill development and training that you can do, 14 free courses that you can access at the Careers Now website. So can't stress enough, go visit CareersNow.ca and please enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you again for joining and have a great day. Bye.